10 minutes to the future. Okay. YouTube hopefully will be going momentarily. My gosh. Published. Okay, YouTube is running. Okay, a bunch of people there. All right, so YouTube is running on the new thing. A new broadcast. This is so frustrating. Okay, and we're live on YouTube. Hopefully people will find it. That one is called Take 2. We'll be getting rid of that Take 1 false start. Somehow we'll break through. We'll get this figured out. I don't know what this is all about. Nothing about it makes sense. Let's light up the darkness. Okay. All right, so where are we? We're on Daf Samech Bet, Daf Samech Beis, page 62, here in Tractate Yoma, the 6th volume of the Talmud. We're opening the 6th chapter and the first Mishna of this chapter. And now we're finally going to be talking about the particulars of the scapegoat ceremony. And we'll be getting to that Mishnah in a moment. But I want to share a couple of stories that I heard today and that bear directly on what we've been learning here in Tractate Yoma. These are the laws of Yom Kippur, as Yom Kippur was observed when the temple was standing. It was destroyed about 2,000 years ago, and so all we've been able to do is study these laws, remember, rehearse, recall, kind of like with a communal memory, study the way that it was done, first when the tabernacle was in our midst, and then the first temple, and then the second temple, and with God's help, the way it will be done again when the third temple is restored in the Messianic age. One of the things that we learned, it's so mysterious, so hard to understand in our journey through these 60 some odd pages of Tractate Yoma, is that whereas in the first temple period, the temple that Solomon built on the site that his father, King David, chose for the temple, there were 18 Kohen Gadol, right? 18 high priests who served in the 400 plus years of the first temple. They all had a long tenure, 18 of them to serve over 400 years. The second temple, there were over 300 high priests who served in that 400-year, more or less, period. Why were they so, why were they replaced so very, very, very often? It's almost like a joke, this is Spinal Tap in the exploding drummer position, right? Boom, boom, boom. Every year, a new Kohen Gadol. Why? And one of the things that we learned is that, well, there was a lot of corruption in the Second Temple period. As we got late into the Second Temple period, the nation was falling further and further out of favor with God. They were straying. They were pursuing idolatry, this, that, and the other thing. Their hearts were not in it. And ultimately, we did not merit to keep ourselves as a nation living in the Holy Land, did not merit to keep the Second Temple in our midst. A Roman general with a Roman army was sent to destroy it, but this was really the stick, that God was using to punish us. The Romans themselves, they didn't survive, right? Eventually, the Roman Empire disappeared from the world. The covenant with the Jewish people was eternal, but the level, the spiritual level of the Jewish people was falling lower and lower and lower during that Second Temple period. And one of the reflections of that, one of the evidences, as it were, of that falling spiritual level was the fact that, every year there was a new Kohen Gadol, and that they got the position not by being chosen by the previous Kohen Gadol or by their brethren, the high priests, but rather through some kind of corruption. Bribes were paid, or really what is it? They paid money for it. Money was paid so that they could be Kohen Gadol. Now, there were much fewer miracles in the Second Temple period than the sort of constant miracles of the First Temple and of the tabernacle. Among those miracles, we learned there was the ever-present holy fire that hovered over the outer altar, the altar in the courtyard where the animal offerings were brought, that the incense had this incredibly straight column that went up and down. The bread was always warm. There were these revealed miracles, kind of ongoing miracles, so that when you went into the first temple, like you just, wow, I'm in the presence of holiness. It was not something you almost didn't need faith to see that something miraculous was going on there on a continual basis. The Second Temple, which lacked the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies, as well as, for example, the staff of Aaron that we read about in this past week's Torah portion, when Korach challenged, right? Korach, Moses and Aaron's cousin, challenged them about the leadership and said, why should your brother be high priest? All of us are holy. Certainly all the Levites are holy, and Korach was a Levite and their cousin. Why do you set up your brother Aaron above all the rest of us? And one of the proofs given by God in that incident was that all the chiefs of the tribes set their staff in the ground, and Aaron's staff blossomed with almond blossoms. Like it was a stick. It was just a stick that had been cut from a tree years before. They put it in the ground, and it miraculously blossomed. And this is actually what a Kohen Gadol is supposed to be. It's not just somebody who serves and does his job according to the Torah laws. It's somebody that can make the nation blossom, who uplifts the people and takes them to a higher spiritual place. So the Second Temple was not as lofty spiritually a place as the First Temple. But one of the miracles that did happen was that if an unworthy priest, a high priest, entered the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, he perished. Either he perished that very day in the Holy of Holies or soon thereafter. So these guys, hundreds of them, who were rich enough to somehow purchase the right to be the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, died doing it. Why would they, the people who obviously seem to value themselves and their pleasure enough to, in a corrupt manner, pursue their own gratification and elevation, but it was a suicide mission. So why would corrupt people who are able to afford anything that, the world can give them, why would they pursue a suicide mission? Well, to understand that, let's look at this incident of Korach. So Korach, in this Torah portion that we just read this morning in synagogue, challenged Moses, said, why are you setting your brother up above all of us? The whole nation are holy. Now, usually we look at Korach as this very, like a villain, or at least a character with very negative traits. Somebody who was really all about himself, consumed with jealousy, wanted more power than he already had. I mean, he was a Levite. The Levites were singled out to assist the priests in the work, the holy service, the avodah, in the tabernacle, in the wilderness. Korach was also exceedingly wealthy. He came out of Egypt with tremendous wealth. And so with all that wealth, all that opportunity, and the distinction of being a Levite, it wasn't enough for him. He wanted more, and in wanting more, he ended up taking himself, these two guys, Dosan and Aviram, and 250 followers. They were separated from the congregation. God proved that he had already selected Moses and his brother Aaron to be the high priest. And Korach and all his followers were literally swallowed up by the earth. A big hole opened up in the earth, and they fell into it and were never seen again. Korach's sons made a teshuvah. His sons didn't follow him in that rebellion, and we actually have Psalms in the book of Psalms attributed to the sons of Korach. So that right there is a clue that maybe we're being a little bit too simplistic when we denigrate Korach and say this man can be summed up as somebody who, his tragic flaw was his jealousy and lust for power, and that's all there is to him. In fact, the rabbinic tradition, the Midrash, says that Korach had a lot more going for him. He was very well educated. He cared about the Torah, and he actually brought some legitimate questions. In fact, Aaron's two sons, his older two sons who were destined to be priests, and one of them the high priest, perished on the day that the tabernacle was erected, Nadav and Avihu. And perhaps Korach looked at that and said, well, maybe it's not right. Maybe Aaron was really just appointed due to nepotism, and maybe he's not the most deserving. And then Korach asked these two questions. If a house is filled with Torah scrolls, does it need a mezuzah? Isn't that just a silly symbol attached to a house whose inherent holiness is that it's filled with Torah scrolls? And if a garment is made out of techelis, that beautiful sky blue dyed thread, which is one of the threads of the fringes on a garment, and the Jewish men are commanded to wear a fringed garment. Well, if the whole garment is made out of the blue thread, that the real purpose of the fringes is to carry that blue thread, why would you need to add the fringes on top? And this is related to his main question. If the whole nation, the Jewish nation, are a nation of priests, and the Torah says that, how are you going to set yourself above us? It's a legitimate question. And there's a midrash that says that Moses said to Aaron, Moses said to Korach, I understand what you're saying. You know what? I want to be Kohen Gadol too. Now that's a very strange answer from Moses. Moses knows better than anybody that everybody in the people was given a specific job. One person's job is to be Moses, our teacher. Another is to be high priest. Another is to be the other priest. Another is to be the butcher and the candle maker and the shepherds and the Torah teachers and the soldiers and the generals. And everyone has a way to serve. Why would Moses, who is at the absolute top of the heap and the greatest prophet who ever lived, who ever will live according to the Torah, why would he say, I want to be Kohen Gadol too? How are we to understand that? So to help us understand that story, my Rav Yakusel Kalmanson today told two stories to help us understand this conundrum of what Moses said to Korach and why all these priests in the Second Temple period who could have a beautiful, rich, comfortable, luxurious life were willing to give up everything and pay the money and be the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, even though it meant dying, and they knew they were going to die. It was a suicide mission. Why? So he told two stories. The first took place in the 1700s, and one of the mitzvahs that we have, it's a very, very elevated, lofty commandment that few of us ever get the opportunity to do, and that is to redeem the captive. When your fellow Jew is imprisoned by the enemy, if you can redeem the captive and bring him back into the nation by paying, a kidnap fee, that kind of thing, you do it. If it's possible to do it, you do it. That mitzvah, that commandment was all too common. The opportunity to perform it was all too common in Eastern Europe, think Ukraine, Poland, Russia, in the 1700s. And a situation that would commonly come up is that Jews were often in the hospitality business, meaning that they basically owned motels. They would run an inn on the side of the road. Back then, if you were making a journey from one city to another that was 300 miles away, well, that journey could easily take you 10 days to accomplish on your donkey or on your horse or even in a wagon. You'd maybe go 30, 40 miles a day, and then you had to spend the night. So there were inns all over the place, many of them run by Jews, but they didn't own the land on which the inn sat. Usually that was owned by a poritz, some kind of rich, wealthy, powerful local landowner, and the Jew had to pay rent to the poritz. These poritzes, these nobles, had absolute power within their region. And if the Jew was always praying that enough people would come by, that he would make enough money from the travelers that he could pay his rent to the poritz. And sometimes, the roads were unpassable, stuff happened, travelers didn't come, they couldn't pay, and then he couldn't pay his rent. And if he fell behind a couple of months, he might well be thrown into the poritz's own debtor's prison. If that happened, how's he going to make money? He's hoping that his wife and kids can keep the inn going, make some money, and redeem him. But usually he's not running the inn falls apart. It was a disaster. There was a man known around that time, a fairly wealthy Jew, who whenever one of these guys would get imprisoned, if it was all possible for him, if he had enough liquid money around, he would go and redeem the captive. They came to him and they told him about this one guy who fell behind to really the most vicious of all these poritzes. And he was languishing in the jail, and the poritz was not even feeding him. He was going to die in that prison, no prisoners' rights, etc. So this somewhat wealthy Jew goes to see the poritz. He says, well, how much will it take to redeem the guy in your prison? And the poritz names an astronomical sum. But the Jew is going to die in that prison if his fellow countryman doesn't redeem him. No one else is going to step up. So this guy thinks to himself, well, if I sell all my property and liquidate all my bank accounts and borrow money based on my very good credit that I already have, I could scrape together just enough to free this fellow from prison. It'll mean losing all that I have, but it'll save his life. And the guy did it. Sold everything, borrowed money, rushed to the poritz, gave him the money. The poritz said, go ahead, take your man. He went down into the prison. Too late. The man had already starved to death. The poritz was certainly not going to return the money that was used to free the one who died in the jail. And this fellow who had lost everything to redeem a fellow Jew who he'd never even met, what was it all for? Was it worth it? What could he do? I mean, it is what it is. At this point, he's walking down the road wondering what it all means. He's overwhelmed. He's exhausted. He sits down to rest. He leans against a tree and he falls asleep. He has a dream. In the dream, an angel comes to him and says to him, your utterly selfless act of unbelievable generosity has caused a great commotion in Shemayim, in heaven. And they've decided to reward you. I've been sent to tell you that you have a choice. You can have one of two things as a reward. Either a vast fortune, much greater than what you liquidated to free your fellow Jew, or for 24 hours, while you're still alive in this world, you could have a taste of the world to come. You can experience the world of souls while you are still alive in this world. It's a unique opportunity. No one's had it. He chose a taste of the world to come while he's still in this world. He figured he made money before. He could make it again. He's never going to get this chance again. He chooses to have a taste of the next world while still in this world. This happened close to Yom Kippur. So a few days later on Yom Kippur, he is in another world. When he's praying during Yom Kippur, everyone is looking at him. This guy is transported. They don't know what's going on inside of him, but he is clearly in some kind of ecstasy. Yom Kippur ends, the fifth service of the day, Nila. Everyone is anxious to go home and eat, break the fast. He is still walking around the bima, where they read the Torah in the front of the room, singing the song that has come to him during this day. And he just wants it to last. He doesn't want to break away even from the remnants of the day that he's had. And he just keeps circling the bima, singing. When they come to the synagogue the next morning to open and have morning services, he's still circling the bima, singing the same song. It was that extraordinary of an experience for him. I'm sorry I didn't catch the melody. The Rav sang it to us later in the day at the evening service. But that melody has been preserved. That's the story of the melody. I'm sorry I can't sing it for you. But for this man, that taste of the divine was worth more than all the worldly goods. He earned it by giving away all his worldly goods to save another person. He could have had even much more. Now the Lubavitcher Rebbe commented when he heard this story that this guy was not a chassid. He was not truly devoted because he should have taken the money. If he had taken the money, think how many captives he could have freed, how many schools he could have endowed, how many hospitals he could have founded. He could have done so much good with that money. However, it wasn't really to blame him or condemn him. It was understandable that for some people, it's worth everything to have that touch of the divine, to have that experience while they're still in this world. And so this first story sheds some light on those priests, those priests who went on the suicide mission in the Second Temple period, that even though they knew they were purchasing something they weren't entitled to, it was going to cost them everything, including their lives, it was worth it to them to have that one transcendent moment inside the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. So is the lesson that maybe sometimes it's worth it to spend it all, risk it all, do it all, to have a transcendent mystical type of experience? Maybe not. But certainly not at the cost of your life, maybe not at the cost of, everyone else around you loses you. But to dedicate part of your fortune or part of your assets, not so much to your physical, material comfort, but to your spiritual elevation, certainly is something that you should mix into your world. And to pursue those kinds of experiences that will spiritually elevate you. Maybe instead of buying the new car, take a trip to a very special place that's meaningful to you where you think you might have such an experience. That might be a better investment than the new car, is one idea. But here's the other story. The other story was about a young yeshiva student who was brilliant. He was absolutely brilliant. As he was approaching graduating from this yeshiva at 18 years of age, everyone knew that this kid is going to be a star. He's going to write books. He's going to be the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of school. He's going to have many Torah students himself. And he went to his Rebbe, who was the first Rebbe of Chabad. This is the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya, the sort of foundational text of Chabad Hasidism, also known as the Alter Rebbe. And he went to get his blessing from the Rebbe as he's launching on this, what's surely going to be a distinguished career as a Torah scholar. And the Rebbe says to him, "You need to be a wagon driver." And everyone who witnesses this is stunned. I mean, a wagon driver in those days, what's a wagon driver? It's somebody who's working 14, 16 hours a day, transporting goods through the countryside, shoeing the horses, cleaning the manure of the horses, and really struggling to make a living. This kid, with his already accomplishments at a young age, they were going to marry him to a rich woman. He was going to not have to work at all so that he could study Torah all day long and teach Torah and live a good and comfortable life in one of the Torah centers. And now he's going to eke out a living on these muddy, terrible roads as a wagon driver. But that's what his Rebbe told him to do. So he did it. He's working for years as a wagon driver. And one time he's in one of these country inns, and an aristocrat. There's an aristocrat who's also at the inn and whose plans have changed. His ride fell through something. He has to get himself to Leipzig the next day. And he doesn't have a ride. And the innkeeper says, well, here's a wagon driver. Maybe he can take you. So he goes to see our fellow, our young Talmud Chacham, Torah scholar / wagon driver. He says, I need to get to Leipzig tomorrow. Can I hire your wagon? Yes, I can take you to Leipzig. Wonderful. I got to be there early. I can't be late. Let's leave at 5 a.m. Oh, no. I have prayers that I say at night, and they take me quite late. And then I have a whole morning set of prayers that I have to do, and the earliest that I can leave is 11 a.m. I'm hiring you. I'm the boss. We're leaving at 5 a.m. I'm sorry, but if you're coming in my wagon, we leave at 11 a.m. Well, the rich guy has no choice. He goes to bed, he's angry, he's furious, but he's not going to be able to leave the next day until 11 a.m. He's kind of in bed, really angry that this uppity, young wagon driver won't leave when he wants. He can't sleep, but he hears something coming from another room in the inn. He gets up, he goes to look around. What does he see? He sees that our young wagon driver is doing Tikkun Hatzos, so it's a prayer service that you say at midnight. Certainly not everybody does. But it's really, what it's all about is completely pouring out your heart before God. And this young man didn't know that he was being watched, was just pouring out his soul to God in such an emotional and, gut-wrenching way. And part of it, of course, is, he still years later, he studies Torah, he prays like a saint. It's unbelievable where he's going to, but he's alone. He's not in a yeshiva. He doesn't have students. He's not learning among the other Torah scholars, and it's heartbreaking for him. So that's part of the way he approaches that prayer in the middle of the night. Well, the aristocrat watching this is mesmerized, watches him for hours. Finally, the kid is done. The aristocrat comes up to him and says, "Where did you learn to pray that way?" And he says, "Well, I'm a chassid. I'm a disciple of the Baal HaTanya, of the Rebbe of Lubavitch." He says, "Okay." So the next day, they get in the wagon. He takes them to Leipzig. They're together for a long time. The aristocrat keeps asking him questions and asks Torah questions, has a really interesting conversation with him, gets to Leipzig, pays him, gives him a nice tip. See you later. The Torah scholar keeps driving his wagon. Another 2 years goes by. And then he's back for a holiday in the court of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe has passed on. There's the new Rebbe, known as the Mittler Rebbe, a young Rebbe who's now taken over the Lubavitch Chabad dynasty. And when our young wagon driver comes in, a man with a beard that he's never seen before comes right up and gives him a huge hug. And he says, "Oh my God, it's so great to see you. Do you remember me?" And our young Torah scholar says, "I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't think we've ever met." He says, "Well, you think you haven't met me because when you last saw me, I didn't have this beard and I didn't look the way I look now. But I was the aristocrat who needed to get to Leipzig, and I was so inspired by watching you pray and talking with you and learning with you and the way you approach life that I changed my entire life. And now I'm a chassid of the Rebbe and I am living a Torah life." And that night, when our Torah scholar went to sleep, he had a dream, and the previous Rebbe came to him and said, "You have fulfilled your mission. It's time for you to go back to the Torah world and be a Rosh Yeshiva, be a head of the yeshiva, and you're going to go much higher than you ever would have otherwise because of the experience you've had these last 10 years and what you learn and the emotional depths that you access. But more than anything, because your 10 years came to a fruition because you rescued this one Jew from living a life ignorant of Torah. You made him a Baal Tshuva, you rescued him and brought him back in, and your 10 years was worth it if only for that." Now, if he had been a wagon driver like most wagon drivers, just being a wagon driver and thinking only about his career and how he could maybe get a second wagon or a third wagon and just only thinking about that, none of this would have happened. It's because he was a wagon driver that remained attached to God and always asking how he could be of service and how he could serve more and why can't he serve better, and pouring out his heart and his love of the Lord at all times. And that impressed the people around him, particularly this one guy who had been lost in the world of luxurious pleasure pursuits. Why do these two stories come as a pair? Because there might be some people, and there might be some times for all people, who are seeking to serve God by experiencing the divine presence. And of course, there's a part of Judaism that is about that. But so much more of Judaism is about serving God in our daily life, in whatever profession we do, and elevating that profession and our pursuits and our relationships and finding what is holy and good and how we can elevate and uplift others in every realm of our life. And if it's given to us to be the high priest, so we should serve as the high priest. But if it's given to us to be a wagon driver or to be the high priest's cousin like Korach, or to be an accountant, a doctor, a tailor, a garbage man, a politician, no matter what you do, you can do it with a full heart and with a desire and an objective to be of service to God and your fellow humans. And that's the lesson that Korach learned too late, but that his sons learned from him and from his father. And there was certainly something very worthy in that family. It was just a small wrong idea that led Korach into a pit of despair and of death. But with the, whatever your fruits are, whatever your gifts are, and everybody has a gift, Everybody has a gift. Everything that the Lord made, he made for his glory. Meaning that no matter who you were created for God's glory. That the fact that you were created is a glorious achievement of God. So since you are a glorious achievement, God is so proud that he created you, your only question is, well, if God is so thrilled that he created me, what is it that he created me for? And once you're asking that question, you're well on your way to fulfilling your mission in this world. All right, wanted to share that. Now let's finally get to our Mishnah. It's going to be somewhat quick because we're just introducing the first Mishnah here in chapter 6. And then I'll get to comments and questions with God's help. So the first Mishnah in chapter 6, and now we're getting into our study of the scapegoat. And when the Rav told these stories today, I said to him, wow, in our Daf Yomi shir, we're just starting the scapegoat today. And it occurs to me that, there's 2 goats on Yom Kippur. One is going to die in the temple. One is going to die in the wilderness. We're all going to die. All of us are going to die at some point from this human existence that we're living now. So that's a given. We don't know when, but we know it's going to end. These goats, they're not human. They don't know exactly what's going on in the future, but their fate is to die on the same day. One is going to die in the midst of holiness in the temple. The other is going to go way out in the wilderness and die alone, this, sort of very unglorious death compared to his partner goat dying in the temple. Is the goat that died in the temple somehow holier? They are absolutely interdependent and interconnected, as we're studying right now. If one of them dies at a certain point, the other one has to be replaced as well. They go together. And the one that dies in the temple is as a sin offering for our sins. The one that goes out to the wilderness carries our sins with it. Both are absolutely necessary to the nation. And again, that same metaphor. Some serve in the precincts of holiness, some serve out in the wilderness. Both have been given a crucial job. Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 6, the mitzvah of the 2 Yom Kippur goats, the goat sacrificed to God and the goat sent to Azazel, the wilderness, that are brought as a pair, is as follows. Ab initio, in other words, this is the way it should be done, that they will both be identical in appearance, i.e. in color and in height and in monetary value, and their acquisition must be as one. In other words, they should be purchased together as a pair. But even if they are not identical, nevertheless, they are valid. And similarly, if you acquired one today and one tomorrow, they are valid. Better to purchase goats that look alike, cost the same, and come together. But if they're not exactly like that, they still work as a pair. Sometimes you get thrown together with the strangest of bedfellows. If one of the goats died, if it died before the high priest drew the lots, assigning one to be the sin offering in the temple and the other to go out into the wilderness, if they died before the high priest drew the lots, he immediately takes a counterpart for the second, the surviving goat, since neither has yet been designated. So if one of the pair dies before the lots are cast, they just bring another goat to match up with the remaining goat. However, if one of them dies after the lots are cast and before they're used in the ritual of the temple that they're there for, if it died after the high priest drew lots, he brings another pair of goats and he draws lots over them from the start. After that lottery, he utters a stipulation. If the one to be sacrificed to God died, that goat upon which the lot for God was drawn in the second lottery shall stand in its stead. And if the one that was to be sent to Azazel died, then the goat that received that lot in the second lottery, it will stand in its stead. And the second superfluous goat, right, the goat from the second pair that is not needed to replace one from the first pair, because this is the one from the first pair that didn't die, that superfluous goat it should graze until it becomes unfit, at which point it will be sold, and the money received from its sale will go toward the purchase of public gift offerings in the temple. Although for individual sin offerings in similar circumstances, there is no remedy and it is left to die, that is not the case here, as a communal sin offering is not left to die. On the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda says, in this, it should be left to die, and the law does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, it follows the majority. And furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda said, if the blood of the goat sacrificed to God spilled before it was sprinkled, the scapegoat is left to die. Similarly, if the scapegoat dies, the blood of the goat sacrificed to God should be spilled, and 2 other goats are brought and lots are drawn. That is the Mishnah. The halacha, where it came out, the law, the 2 Yom Kippur goats should be identical in appearance, size, and monetary value. They should be purchased together. Nevertheless, they may be used even if they are not identical or were not purchased together. If one of the goats died before the lottery is cast, the high priest brings a counterpart for the remaining goat. If one of the goats dies after the lottery, the high priest brings 2 new goats and draws new lots. It is the if the goat that died was to be sacrificed to God, the goat selected to be sacrificed to God in the second lottery takes its place. If the goat that died was the one sent to be Azazel, the goat selected to be sent to Azazel in the second lottery takes its place. In the case where a new pair of goats was brought, the remaining goat of the second pair is put out to pasture until it becomes blemished. It is then sold, and the proceeds are used for a communal gift offering. This is in accordance with the Mishnah and the opinion of Rav in the Gemara. So we're going to leave it at that. The rest of the page is describing how they derive that law. They do that pretty quickly in the first 3 paragraphs. And then they make a comparison to the offerings brought by a leper who also has to bring 2 animals and what happens if one of them dies and how they handle it. It's analogous to the situation of the 2 goats of Yom Kippur. Okay. Let me check your comments and questions, if any. Bill, it is always so horribly, horribly dangerous to respond to our enemies by dehumanizing them, even and perhaps especially with our storied villains, because it is so tempting and so easy. But in doing so, we end up denying implicitly, the image of God that they bear. It is hard work to look at our enemies and see the image of God, but it's the work that God wants of us, I think. Good, Bill. I agree with you. Sharon, Korach misquoted God's words to make his point. He said, all the people are holy, when in fact the text says, you shall be holy. You have to earn holiness through living a life of holiness. Beautiful. All the people are holy means everyone has an equal opportunity to create holiness in their lives. It doesn't mean that we're all the same. We see over and over and over again, the Torah and our sages and the tradition draws distinctions. We're not all the same. We're all completely different. And it's easy for us to say, according to the standards of this society, this one is taller, that one is more handsome, this one is wealthier, this one is more charming, this one is, more charismatic, that one is boring, that one is unpleasant. And we pass all these kinds of judgments, and we don't even know, we have no idea how score is kept in heaven. And the accomplishments that seem like a big deal here might mean bupkis up there, right? But we all have an equal opportunity to fulfill, the purpose that God had in mind when he performed the glorious act of creating you and creating him and creating her and creating them and creating me, etc. Regarding Korach being swallowed up, I think James Ridgway says, modern sinkholes make this so much more believable, just a thought. Right? It's hard to imagine the miracle of the earth opening up and swallowing Korach and his followers. And then in these last few years, these unbelievable sinkholes, right? There was one under a car dealership that swallowed 30 cars. But a sinkhole on demand, that is certainly a miracle that God put down. Oh my God, I didn't know this. So Nina's telling me that there was a giant sinkhole this past week at Shaare Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem. That hospital is called Shaare Tzedek, the Gates of Righteousness, which in fact swallowed up cars. And during the week of the Korach Parsha, maybe a message. I don't know. There's a lot been going on in the world lately. I mean, we had the tragedy at Meron. We have, all this rampant, completely explicit anti-Semitism in the world. there's all kinds of messages possible in events that are going on in the world right now. And a lot of people are going to be very quick to tell you what it all means. Personally, I think that for sure, whenever anything out of the ordinary happens in the world, a person should ask, what can I learn from this? God, please help me understand. And very often the answer that comes to that question is, what can I do that I'm not doing already that will be more in line with fulfilling my mission in this world? Not, what does it mean so that I can get out there on my soapbox and scold others? Sometimes your job is to rebuke your fellow. But I think more often the question is to ask ourselves, how can we do better? That's certainly how I approach these kinds of questions generally. That's what I've got for us tonight. I'm going to be up late after I sign off. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to try to reset everything in terms of our Facebook, YouTube connections. I don't know what's been going on the last few days. I don't know if Facebook is deprioritizing going into Facebook with a Mevo connection. I actually tested it on my test page for Facebook stuff. It worked fine. So I don't know what's going on, but maybe signing out and signing in. I'll do my best. My friends, have a great evening, and with God's help, I'll see you tomorrow. All the best.